My parents said they couldn't afford 2 kids, so my sister's daughter got the vacation. When they returned, they found out we'd left for good and taken every price I'd ever bought with us. They started screaming. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened to the muffled shouts from inside the house. Sarah gripped my hand, her knuckles white. We huddled behind the overgrown rose bushes, the cool night air doing little to calm our racing pulses. "They're really mad," she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, a grim satisfaction coiling in my stomach. Mad was an understatement. Furious, incandescent with rage, that was more like it. The past few weeks had been a blur of clandestine packing, hushed phone calls, and the constant gnawing fear of being caught. But now, as their furious screams pierced the night, a wave of defiant triumph washed over me. "They deserved it," I muttered, more to myself than to Sarah. The image of my sister's smug face as she showed off her vacation photos, knowing full well I'd been denied the same opportunity, fueled my resolve. My parents' excuse, like we can't afford 2 kids, and had been a flimsy veil for their blatant favoritism. Every antique clock, every porcelain doll, every piece of jewelry I had meticulously collected over the years, now sat safely tucked away in the back of a rented moving truck. Miles from here, suddenly the front door burst open. My mother's silhouette was framed in the doorway, her voice a shrill shriek that cut through the night. "They're gone. Everything's gone." My father's roar followed, a deep guttural sound of pure disbelief and fury. Sarah gasped, pulling me further into the shadows. We needed to go. Now. Our escape had been planned with military precision, but the final moments were always the most dangerous. As we crept away from the house, hugging the fence line, I risked one last glance back. My parents were on the porch now, illuminated by the harsh security light, their figures contorted in anger and shock. It was a picture I knew would be seared into my memory forever. The gravel crunched beneath our sneakers as we ran, the frantic shouts of my parents slowly fading into the backdrop of the suburban night. Each thumping beat of my heart was a drum roll, signaling both terror and liberation. Sarah, usually so composed, was breathing heavily beside me, her hand still locked in mine, a silent testament to our shared ordeal. We didn't speak, didn't dare to break the fragile bubble of our escape until we reached the main road. The streetlights casting long, distorted shadows that danced ahead of us like mischievous spirits. Our ride. A beat-up, dark blue van was waiting exactly where we'd planned. Jake, my oldest and most loyal friend, was behind the wheel, his face a mask of concern and determination. He'd been an unwitting accomplice, believing we were just moving out for college, a sudden decision fueled by a fictitious scholarship opportunity. The truth of our flight, the sheer audacity of our rebellion, was a secret only Sarah and I shared. For now. "Get in, quickly!" he urged, his voice low and urgent. We scrambled into the back, pulling the heavy side door shut with a resounding thud that echoed in the quiet street. Jake floored the accelerator, and the van lurched forward, leaving behind the only home I had ever known, and the wreckage of a family shattered by neglect and betrayal. As we sped away, the adrenaline began to recede, replaced by a cold, hollow ache. The initial rush of defiance was giving way to the terrifying reality of our situation. We were truly alone, 2 teenagers against the world with nothing but a van full of stolen memories and a desperate hope for a new beginning. Are they following us?" Sarah finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the rumble of the engine. I peered through the tinted back window, my eyes scanning the deserted street. "No," I said, though a tremor ran through me. "Not yet." But I knew it was only a matter of time. My parents, particularly my mother, were not ones to let go easily, especially not of her prized possessions. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. The antique clock, a family heirloom, had been my grandmother's. My mother had always made it clear it was her legacy. And now it was mine. "Where are we going, Jake?" I asked, leaning forward, trying to keep my voice steady. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed. The plan was to head north, like we discussed. Upstate, towards the cabin. My uncle isn't using it this season. The cabin, a remote rustic hideaway nestled deep in the Catskill Mountains. It was ideal. Isolated. Untraceable. For a while, at least, the journey was long and silent, punctuated only by the occasional sigh from Sarah or the drone of the van's engine. Every shadow on the road seemed to hold a lurking threat. Every approaching headlight a potential pursuer. My mind replayed the last few months, dissecting every slight, every dismissive comment. Every instance of my sister Clara, being favored Clara, with her perfectly coiffed hair and saccharine smile, had always been my parents' golden child. Her accomplishments, no matter how minor, were celebrated with fanfare, while my own often more significant achievements were met with a lukewarm nod, if any acknowledgement at all. The vacation, however, had been the final straw. A 2-week trip to Hawaii, paid for entirely by my parents, for Clara and her daughter, while I was told in no uncertain terms that there wasn't enough money for even a modest weekend getaway for me. We just can't afford 2 kids. Darling, my mother had purred, stroking my hair with a dismissive pat. The sting of those words, the casual cruelty of her tone still resonated in my ears. It wasn't about money. It was about worth. And in their eyes, Clara's worth far outweighed mine. The decision to leave had been brewing for months, a slow-burning ember of resentment that finally ignited into a roaring inferno. Sarah, my best friend since kindergarten, had been my confidant, my co-conspirator, and my rock. She had watched, helpless as I was systematically sidelined, and her fierce loyalty had transformed into a shared determination to escape. "Are you sure about this?" she had asked me just last week as we meticulously wrapped my collection of vintage vinyl records. "More sure than I've ever been about anything," I'd replied, my voice firm. "I can't live like this anymore, Sarah. I'm not a second-class citizen in my own home." And so the plan had taken shape. A carefully orchestrated ballet of deception and daring. We'd waited for my parents and Clara to leave for the airport, then, with Jake's unwitting help, we'd systematically emptied my room, piece by precious piece. My antique furniture, the canvases I'd painted, the rare books I'd meticulously collected, all loaded into the van bound for a new life. The most painful part had been leaving behind my beloved cat. Mittens, but a kind neighbor, had promised to take her in, understanding the unspoken desperation in my eyes. The sun was beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of soft pink and orange, as we finally turned onto the narrow, winding dirt road that led to the cabin. The trees here were denser, taller, their branches intertwining overhead to form a natural canopy that shielded us from the awakening world. It felt like entering another realm, a secret haven far removed from the chaos we had left behind. "We're here," Jake announced, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The cabin was exactly as I remembered it from old photos, a rustic log structure nestled in a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines and the crisp, clean scent of pine needles and damp earth. A thin wisp of smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney, a comforting sign that someone had recently been there. "My uncle," Jake explained, seeing my questioning gaze. "He was up here last weekend. Said he left some firewood and a few essentials." As we unloaded the van, the weight of each box, each piece of furniture, felt less like a burden and more like a symbol of our newfound freedom. The old grandfather clock, its polished oak gleaming in the morning light, was carefully carried inside and placed in the corner of the living room, its familiar tick-tock a comforting presence in the unfamiliar space. "It's beautiful," Sarah breathed, running her hand over the rough-hewn wooden walls. "It feels safe," and it did. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. But even in this tranquil haven, the specter of my parents' wrath still loomed. I knew they wouldn't give up. They would call the police, they would spread rumors, they would do everything in their power to make our lives a living hell. "We need to be careful," I warned, looking at Jake and Sarah. "They'll be looking for us, and they'll be angry." Jake nodded grimly. "I know, I've been thinking about that. I told my parents I was going camping for a few weeks off-grid. They won't suspect anything for a while." "And your phone?" Sarah asked, ever practical. "Turned off, battery removed," he confirmed. "We're completely off the grid here. No cell service, no internet, just us and the wilderness." It was a daunting thought, but also strangely liberating. A forced detox from the constant digital clamor of modern life. A chance to truly disappear. For the next few days, we settled into a routine. We chopped firewood, hauled water from the nearby well, and explored the surrounding woods. Sarah, with her innate talent for organization, meticulously arranged our belongings, turning the rustic cabin into a cozy, habitable home. I spent hours sketching, capturing the wild beauty of our surroundings, finding solace in the rhythmic stroke of my charcoal. Jake, surprisingly adept at wilderness survival, taught us how to identify edible plants and track small game. But even amidst the newfound serenity, An undercurrent of tension hummed beneath the surface. Every distant siren, every unfamiliar car passing on the main road, sent a jolt of fear through us. We spoke in hushed tones about our future, our plans, our desperate hope that our parents wouldn't find us. One evening, as we sat by the crackling fire, the flames dancing hypnotically in the dim light, Sarah broke the silence. "What do you think they're doing right now?" I stared into the embers, picturing my parents' grand house now empty of my presence, filled only with their rage. "Probably tearing the place apart," I mused. "My mother will be hysterical about the antique clock. My father, he'll be calling every police station in the state." "Do you think they'll really call the police?" Jake asked, his voice laced with concern. "I mean, technically you didn't steal anything. It was all yours." "That's not how they'll see it," I retorted, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "They'll say I absconded with their property. They'll spin a tale of a troubled, rebellious child who ran away and stole from her loving, generous parents. They'll try to paint you as the villain," Sarah finished, her eyes narrowed in anger. "Exactly. I knew their game. They were masters of manipulation, of twisting narratives to suit their own agenda. I just hoped the police would see through it." Days bled into a week, then 2. We were running low on some supplies, and a trip into the nearest town, a small, sleepy hamlet called Oakhaven, became necessary. It was a risky venture, a direct exposure to the outside world, but unavoidable. "I'll go," Jake volunteered. "I'm less recognizable. You two stay here. Don't open the door for anyone." I handed him a list, our meager funds clutched in my hand. "Be careful, Jake. Don't talk to anyone about us. Just get what we need and come straight back." He nodded, a serious expression on his face. "I will." As the van disappeared down the dirt road, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. Sarah and I spent the day in nervous anticipation, jumping at every creak of the cabin, every rustle in the woods. The silence, once comforting, now felt heavy with foreboding. Late that afternoon, just as the sun began its descent, we heard the familiar rumble of the van approaching. A wave of relief washed over me. He was back. But as the vehicle pulled into the clearing, I noticed something was off. The van was caked in mud, and Jake's usually neat hair was disheveled. His face was pale, his eyes wide with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. "Jake, what happened?" I rushed out, my voice laced with alarm. He practically stumbled out of the driver's seat, his hands shaking as he fumbled with a bag of groceries. I saw them. My blood ran cold. Who did you see?" "Your parents," he choked out, his voice hoarse. "They were in town. With the police." Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "They were asking around," Jake continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Showing pictures of you two. They even had a description of the van, though they didn't know it was my van. I barely made it out of there without them seeing me." A cold dread seeped into my bones. They were closer than I thought. Much closer. The illusion of safety in our secluded cabin shattered, replaced by the stark reality of being hunted. "What do we do?" Sarah whispered, her eyes darting around the clearing as if expecting my parents to materialize from behind the trees at any moment. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing thoughts. Panic wouldn't help. "We needed a plan, fast. We can't stay here," I stated, the words feeling heavy on my tongue. "It's too risky now. If they're in Oakhaven, they'll eventually find this cabin." "Jake, is there anywhere else? Anywhere completely off the map?" He thought for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. There's an old trapper's shack, deep in the wilderness. It's abandoned, barely more than a lean-to. No one's been there in decades. It's a grueling hike, though, miles from any road. How far?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with apprehension. "At least a full day's trek, even for an experienced hiker," Jake admitted. "Through dense forest, over rough terrain. It won't be easy, especially with all your stuff." My gaze fell on the grandfather clock, then on the boxes of my cherished possessions. We couldn't take everything. We would have to leave most of it behind. The thought was like a physical blow, a wrenching sacrifice after everything we had risked. "We take what we can carry," I decided, my voice firm despite the ache in my chest. "Essentials. Food, water, sleeping bags, and some of the smaller, most precious items. The rest we leave." The decision was agonizing, but necessary. Survival trumped sentimentality. We spent the rest of the evening making preparations, sorting through our belongings, deciding what to keep and what to abandon. Each item left behind felt like a piece of my soul, but the threat of capture spurred us onward. As night fell, a new kind of fear settled in. We were no longer just running. We were fleeing deeper and deeper into the unknown, stripped of our comforts, our only hope resting on a dilapidated trapper's shack and the fading promise of anonymity. The next morning, under the pale glow of a crescent moon, we set out. Each of us carried a heavy backpack, our faces grim with determination. The grandfather clock, my antique records, my canvases, all stood silent witnesses in the empty cabin, a heartbreaking monument to what we had to leave behind. The hike was brutal. The forest was thick and unforgiving, the path barely discernible. We pushed through thorny bushes, scrambled over moss-covered rocks, and waded through icy streams. The weight of our packs dug into our shoulders and our muscles screamed in protest. Sarah, though physically smaller, displayed an incredible resilience, her spirit unwavering despite her exhaustion. Jake, our guide, navigated with an almost primal instinct, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain, his ears attuned to every rustle and snap. By late afternoon, we were utterly spent. Our clothes were torn, our faces scratched, and our bodies ached in ways we hadn't known possible. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm us, Jake stopped, raising a hand. "Look," he whispered, pointing ahead. Through the dense foliage, barely visible, stood a small leaning structure, almost swallowed by the encroaching wilderness. The trapper's shack. It was even more dilapidated than I had imagined, its wooden walls rotting, its roof partially collapsed. But it was shelter. It was a destination. A wave of exhaustion-fueled relief washed over me. We had made it. For now. As we approached the shack, a sense of eerie desolation enveloped us. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and decay. Inside it was dark and dusty, filled with the ghosts of forgotten lives. But it was ours, for however long we could hold on to it. We spent the evening clearing out the shack, making it as habitable as possible. A makeshift fire pit was dug outside, and soon a small flickering flame offered a semblance of warmth and comfort against the encroaching darkness. As we huddled around the fire, sharing a meager meal of dried fruit and nuts, the gravity of our situation pressed in on me. We were truly alone, isolated from the world, reliant only on each other. "They won't find us here," Sarah said, her voice small but resolute. I wanted to believe her, desperately, but a nagging fear gnawed at me. My parents were relentless, and now they had the police on their side. How long would it be before they narrowed down their search? How long before they found the abandoned cabin, and then perhaps found traces of our desperate escape? The thought sent a shiver down my spine, despite the warmth of the fire. The thrill of our initial defiance had long faded, replaced by the grim reality of being fugitives. This wasn't a game. This was our lives. "We need to be smarter," I said, looking at Jake and Sarah. "We can't just hide. We need to plan our next move. We need to figure out how to clear my name, how to get my possessions back, and how to finally be free of them." A flicker of determination ignited in their eyes. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. And together, we would face whatever came next.